I still owe you a topic you were probably waiting for. Finally conclude their own trade agreements. That was one of the Brexit promises. And now Great Britain has broken off talks about one of those trade pacts with Canada. And criticism comes from the opposition, of course. Britain is finding out just how hard it can be to negotiate free trade deals, even with close allies and friends. Nearly 8 years after Brexit campaigners persuaded a slim majority to vote to leave the European Union on a platform that included promises of a brighter future as a global trading nation, the UK government has walked away from talks to replace its legacy EU trade deal with Canada over disputes involving beef, cars, and cheese. The talks between the United Kingdom and Canada, which share a head of state with King Charles and are both members of NATO and the Group of Seven, the leading advanced economies, began in March 22, 2 years after Britain officially left the EU. Goods and services have continued flowing between the two countries under the terms of the EU-Canada Free Trade Deal. But Britain had sought to negotiate a new trade deal with Canada that would improve upon the terms of the existing agreement. Parts of the current deal are also due to expire or have already done so, with no new rules to replace them. UK car makers, which currently pay low or no import taxes when exporting to Canada, could face much higher taxes from April. And meanwhile, rules governing the export of British cheese to Canada expired in December. And now UK producers selling to Canada face paying tariffs of up to 245% of the value of their cheese. And so the British government has broken off these negotiations with Canada on the trade agreement. The reason was disagreements over the import and export of beef and cheese. The two countries had been negotiating this new trade deal for the past 2 years, as I said, since Britain fully left the EU. As the talks progressed, Canadian negotiators came under increasing pressure from the beef industry and local dairies. The beef industry wanted access to the UK for its hormone-treated beef, while cheesemakers warned about the economic impact of duty-free cheese from Britain, particularly cheddar. Duty-free cheese exports from the UK will ended at the end of 2023 after a temporary side deal expired, leaving UK producers with the higher tariffs I mentioned. And the British government said it was open to resuming talks in the future, but there had been no progress so far. And Canada's Trade Minister Mary Ning wrote on X, formerly known as Twitter, that the Canadian government will never agree to a deal that is not good for their workers, farmers, and businesses. And Minette Batters, president of the Nation Farmers Union of England and Wales, praised the British government, particularly its apparent refusal to allow hormone-treated beef into the UK. Trade in agricultural products is always the first thing discussed and the last thing agreed, she said. I'm glad that the government stuck to its line and didn't give in. One of the key benefits touted during Britain's 2016 referendum on EU membership was that it would allow the country to pursue an independent trade policy. However, few new trade deals have been negotiated since Brexit, and the resulting benefits are widely seen as, even if I'm nice, I have to say modest when compared to the trade barriers now erected between the UK and the EU. Before Brexit, Britain was able to trade freely within the Union. The Conservative British government, which negotiated the post-Brexit trade deal with the EU, tried to play down the failure of talks with Canada. It's a benefit of our independent trading status that we are able to insist on the details of any agreement to ensure it works, particularly in the interest of Britain. That was said by Camilla Marshall, a spokeswoman for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. We are open to resuming discussions with Canada in the future if we can build a trade relationship that is beneficial to businesses and consumers on both sides, she said. There is no timetable for these discussions. Well, the opposition Labour Party described the failure of the negotiations as another significant failure by the government to keep its post-Brexit promises. With the collapse of talks, concerns are growing that British cars could face higher export tariffs from April when another temporary tariff-free agreement, similar to the one for cheese, expires. The British Chamber of Commerce described the collapse of the talks as unwelcome news and called on the government to help the affected sectors. For our dairy exporters and parts of our processing industry, the loss of important trade preferences means a worse situation than before 2020. That was said by William Bain, head of trade policy at the Chamber. The annual trade volume between the two countries is around £26 billion. The stalled talks represent a blow to the UK's ambition to strike better trade deals now that it is outside of the EU, according to David Hennig, Director of UK Trade Policy at the Brussels-based European Centre for International Political Economy. We won't get an improved deal. We'll actually have worse trading conditions than we did as EU members. That's what he told CNN. An unnamed Canadian government official speaking to Reuters suggested the UK had only itself to blame for what is the first failed attempt to replace EU trading arrangements with a third country after Brexit. Britain did not act as fast as it should have in negotiations and expects Canada to just give it these things. That's what the official told Reuters. But Minette Betters, the president of the National Farmers Union I quoted earlier, which represents farmers in England and Wales, took a different view. The Prime Minister put it in writing last year that he would not be importing hormone-treated beef or chlorine-washed chicken. That's what she told the BBC. Canada has played hardball for a long time. It was always going to come to a crunch point as to who was going to capitulate. Well, a UK government source said Canada appeared to have lost the sight of the bigger picture. The British and Canadian businesses who do these 26 billion worth of trade a year and the people they employ. And he also said, if Canada come back to the table with a serious offer and desire to make progress, we are all ears. But in the meantime, we are going to focus on other trade deals that deliver for UK businesses. The two nations have, as I said, been negotiating for the last 2 years, with trade continuing under the arrangements brokered when the UK was a member of the EU. And negotiations began on a new agreement in March 22, and the previous agreement had allowed this cars and cheese stuff with the low import tax and so on. In November 2020, then Prime Minister Boris Johnson claimed a new post-Brexit deal with Canada would go even further in meeting the needs of their economy. Well, hopes were raised that a deal could finally be done this year when Ms. Badenoch worked closely with her Canadian counterpart in talks that saw the UK join its ally in the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. You remember CPTPP. However, it is quite unbelievable that they think that with less political and economic power than they had before, because the EU as a whole has much more economic power, they could negotiate something better. But the Minette Betters isn't better. She still is kind of in a cuckoo's land, or they believe everybody has to give them whatever they want. I mean, we know this from the negotiations on the TCA. But I really don't understand how they can sincerely believe that this is going to happen. Canada doesn't have to give them anything. Canada will make a trade deal if it benefits them as well, and if it benefits them more than it does harm them. But this what I should call a Brexit blow comes after a top group of MPs wanted that Britons heading to Europe could face waits of 14 hours or so at the border checks because of the new travel rule changes and everything. And business chiefs have warned that the fresh wave of Brexit red tape coming at the end of January and April is already creating an existing existential crisis for British fresh food and flour firms. And still, they somehow have not arrived in reality. But nevertheless, if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.